welcome to JC Sports Detroit. I'm your host, Joe Chapp. Obviously, today we are going to be talking about the Detroit Red Wings because when we talk about the Detroit Red Wings, we usually talk about the Detroit Red Wings and we talk about their March foibles, right? But I think it's going to be very interesting to watch this video because what I'm about to show you shows you that the Detroit Red Wings, whether it be uh, from coaching malpractice or whatever the case may be, because we know that Coach Alone was fired last year, it's not March that's the issue, which it kind of is, but we'll get to the reason why it kind of flows into the March is the issue. So if you're new to the channel, subscribe, rate, review, and we will have all the Red Wings content for you. Red Alert podcast is on here, all that. So let's get to it. This is the most critical moment for the Detroit Red Wings, and let me explain why. Obviously, we know that March is the biggest foible for the Detroit Red Wings, and we think about it like this. Every person is waiting to buy in until March. Like every person is waiting to buy in until March. Okay. And whether you are the staunchest fan, whether you are the most loyal fan, you're sitting there going, when do I buy in? Like when do I fully buy in? Because you've been hurt before. We know that's the case. So with the Detroit Red Wings, this is the most critical point of the season. Let me explain why. So I have this graphic right here, and this is the last 2 years of point percentage. Now I'm going to explain this to you. The orange is a team they're in the middle of the pack in terms of point percentage. Yellow is below average. Green is above average. I'll explain the statistics and how it relates to other playoff teams. And red is below average. It's bottom of the barrel. Like the worst teams have that point percentage. So here's the point percentages the last 2 years. In November, they were a 583 point percentage. December's 433 the last 2 years. January and February. Now I want you to look at the January statistic right there. 750 point percentage and 731 in February. I want you to look at those two, and I want you just to remember this. The closest team to that winning percentage in those 2 months or throughout the season, there was one team that had over a 740 win percentage. One, and it was the Detroit Red Wings. There was two teams that had a 735 winning percentage, but they did it for like 2-3 months, and those were the best teams. I think one year it was Florida, and the other year I think it was Vegas. So that just shows you the rarefied era that you are in when you go through the February and January, and you're the best team by 10 points. It shows you exactly where you need to be. But you look at the December and November right there. Now I point out the November for this distinct reason only. November is 583. When you compare it to other playoff teams in terms of where they are in point percentage, it's middle of the pack. And I'm talking middle of the pack with teams that just make the playoffs. They don't get like the division. They're not the top 3 in their division. They're wild card teams. Okay. And then you look at this December, yellow, which means they were below average, 433 percentage. And what I did is, it was interesting. I added up all these point percentages. And the teams that did not do good in November and December usually missed the playoffs. Now there was 4 outliers to that. There was the Montreal Canadiens last year. There was Tampa Bay, because they didn't do good in November and December, but they caught fire and they made up ground, and they made up ground pretty quick. And then there was another outlier, which they didn't do nothing in the playoffs, but it was the St. Louis Blues a couple years ago. So those are your outliers. How does it compare to what the Detroit Red Wings did in those first 2 months? Well, if you were to add it up and you were to put it together, those first 2 months cost you about 15 points. About 15 points. If you would have just spent 500 in November, it roughly could have cost you 8 to 9 points, and that would have got you to playoffs. So what happens is when we go through the whole year and we're talking about the Detroit Red Wings, and we see that they're in January and February, they're just rolling along. They're rolling. 750 win percentage, 731 win percentage. Obviously, after the Four Nations face-off, they kind of took a back seat. but it's proof. You know, Scotty Bowman once said this, and I looked up this quote to see if it was actually attributed to Scotty Bowman, but he said, you know, it's a marathon, not a sprint, to be the best team in the league. You have to consistently be a good team to make the playoffs. That's what he said. And when you look at the Detroit Red Wings the last 2 years, and you under Derek Lalonde, you go, a 580 point percentage isn't bad, not bad at all. But majority of those games in November went to overtime, so it skewed the numbers. December was hands down the worst. And when I looked it up with win percentage, because win percentage I was looking up the first time, it was 383 in December. And you're just not going to win hockey games like that. So what I will say to you is this. The Detroit Red Wings start their 5-game road trip to the West Coast. They start tonight against St. Louis. So if you're listening to this on Wednesday or Thursday, this was from Tuesday. But they start against St. Louis, and it's a pivotal road trip for them, in my opinion, because if they can just stay the course, go through November, have a good record, go through December, have a good record in terms of point percentage, in terms of win percentage, stack those wins up. Because as we see the Detroit Red Wings the last couple years, they fall apart in March. And you could see that their winning percentage in March is 286. And it goes to what I was trying to tell you in the beginning of the video. The reason the Red Wings fall apart in March is proof positive right here. The 750 point percentage and 731 point percentage is so astronomically high. There's no way they can keep up with that. And it seems like, going back to what Scotty Bowman said in that quote I just gave you, it's a marathon, not a sprint. If you're running a marathon and you don't start, if you don't start, jogging, keeping pace, you're gonna have to sprint the last couple of miles, and that's just not sustainable because at the end you get gassed. And that's exactly what's happening with the Detroit Red Wings. They get gassed going through that sprint in January and February. Then they get to March and they fall apart. It's not rocket science. It's just true science. Like, these are the numbers. These are the facts. These 2 months that we have coming up, November and December. We always hear about the quarter point for the NHL season, Thanksgiving. We want to see where they are at that point. And then when we get to Christmas, where are they at that point? And what's their point percentage? And that's what I'm going to be tracking through the rest of the season. If you're a Detroit Red Wings fan, I would be tracking it to make sure that, let's see what they do. And upon that, we'll make a determination of if they're really a viable playoff team. But let's just be completely honest with each other. The reason the Detroit Red Wings have not made the playoff isn't because they just fall apart in March. I mean, that's just a total lie. It's just a total lie. Like, you can't make up that. You can't have that high of a point percentage, like I just said, and keep it up. It's statistically impossible. So, if you're a Red Wings fan, this is the most important time for this team. If they're really going to prove you that you want to buy in, they got to have a point percentage around 500, 600. And if they do that, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. I guarantee you that. But the reason that they have this horrible, horrible track record of falling apart in March is because they are sprinting in January and February to make up ground. And you get to March and you're just gassed. You're just gassed. And, I know, McClellan, he would say the same thing. Like, look, but he wouldn't make excuses for the team. But he would simply say, look, we got to be better throughout the season. And that's the key right there. And we'll see you guys on the next Red Alert podcast and the next video on JC Sports Detroit. So subscribe, rate, and review. And we'll give you the Red Alert podcast YouTube page below. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.